like a hero, but I can't.
From the PEN studios in Chicago, you're listening to This or That with your hosts Paul Grote and Scott Sanders.
Welcome to the second all-time network version of This or That, where the paradigm here is the two hosts, myself, Scott Sanders, and Paul Grote. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Scott. How are you today?
We're good. We're going to talk about something that's very timely, and this comes from the world of sports, and it is the argument around name, image, and likeness, or NIL. You'll hear us use the phrase NIL a lot. So recently, some laws went into place that prompted the NCAA and individual colleges to act as well, that allow athletes to make money off of their name, image, and likeness. So they can start to do endorsement deals, essentially, is what the law entails. And it is, at this point in time, really the wild west of this NIL debate, this NIL earning power, this NIL activity for athletes around the country. And there are going to be some pros and cons to it, some good and bad. So it fits nicely into the this or that argument. I today will take the argument of the, hey, NIL is bad policy side, and Paul will take the good. In our last episode where we talked about Goodfellas and The Godfather, Paul basically went first on a lot of those topics. So because I feel so strongly about this issue and it being bad policy, I want to lead us in. So true to our format, we've got several different sections, and we'll break it up so that the arguments can be more concise. And our goal is to try to persuade you over to our way of thinking. And Paul, I think I start at a disadvantage in this episode because the ability of college athletes or athletes in general to earn off of their own name, image, and likeness is something I think a lot of people can get behind, right? That, this is a really good place to be. My argument, though, that it's bad policy is going to be in its implementation or lack of standards, lack of any type of framework for this all to hang on, and it's going to lead to a lot of unintended consequences, a lot of negatives, not just for the student athletes, but for the colleges, the NCAA, the fans, even up to the quality of play on the field, I think is going to be affected by this lack of framework around name, image, and likeness.
Absolutely, Scott. I don't disagree at all that it will lead to unintended or unanticipated consequences. I guess the question becomes whether those consequences are good or bad.
Okay, so I've got the bad side, and Paul's going to take the good. And the first of our topics here on the Podcast Entertainment Network, podcast This or That, is going to be the impact on the athletes themselves. So that's the logical place to start as we're talking about this. And I think that the cons outweigh the pros as it relates to this, the impact on the student athlete. And a lot of that involves pressure. So far, a lot of athletes have signed different things. Two of these data points to highlight involve seven-figure numbers for people who haven't really done anything. So this isn't the star Heisman Trophy winner type scenario or a college senior or junior doing this. The two things that I want to highlight to start and to help frame the argument is the presumptive quarterback of Alabama has signed $1 million endorsement, or total endorsements totaling over $1 million. And he hasn't really taken a snap for Alabama. He's anticipated, he hasn't been named the starter of Alabama, but the number one college football program, the most important position, you could see why brands would want to align themselves with this student athlete. But the pressure on him to perform, it's already been insurmountable for some student athletes through the years, and the pressure of playing at Alabama, playing quarterback at Alabama, playing football in the SEC, having the standard be national championship or it's a failure of a season, all of that already sits on this kid's shoulders, and now he's got endorsement deals to worry about around that. Hey, if I throw 3 interceptions, am I going to lose my deals? There's $1 million at stake here. And that's just starting. It's summer. We haven't even gotten into the fall or haven't gotten to the point where a lot of brands know that they can even do this. So he's at $1 million now. He'll be way over that at a point in the near future. And to have all that pressure on his shoulders is going to be a lot for him to carry, in addition to everything that's already on the quarterback of Alabama's shoulders. So that's one thing that's really important. Let me take that not just a step forward in terms of bad policy, a giant leap forward. The number 7 high school basketball recruit, not even the top high school basketball recruit, the number 7 basketball recruit has also signed $1 million deal to be represented in his NIL activities by an agency. So a high school kid is also at a 7-figure number when he hasn't dribbled the ball once on a college campus, not eligible for the draft for another year. He's still in high school. So it's great that there's a high school kid making $1 million, right? But how many great high school recruits flame out in college? How many of these top 50 type recruits don't amount to much? Every year there's a handful. Every year there's 10%, 15% of them, don't succeed in college as it is, let alone with $1 million on the line. Now, a lot of these kids don't want to be in, as it relates to basketball, don't want to be in college anyway. If you've got $1 million in your pocket, what is your incentive to perform, to work, to be part of a team when really what you're doing is riding out your time to the draft, right? So while this might be great for the average student athlete, some of this high pressure at the high end of this nil activity already here in the first 3 weeks are going to lead to a severe negative impact on the student athletes at a time where their maturity level isn't ready to handle it. Paul, what are your thoughts as it relates to the impact on student athletes?
Sure. So some interesting comments there, Scott. And there is some risk of a young man or a young woman taking $1 million and what that could wind up doing to them, or how that might incentivize them before they take one snap or dribble a basketball and so on. We got to remind ourselves, though, it's still a choice. All it is permissible now. That's all. So if we've got an athlete who is maybe prone to being under pressure, or know that they are at risk of cracking, the more that they put upon themselves, maybe they need to not take that $1 million deal. Maybe they need to take a $100,000 deal, or maybe take no deal. So ultimately still a choice. So that's kind of my pushback against your opening argument. The big one, though, is really kind of, hey, it's about time. I mean, for the last, however many years, there's been big money in NCAA sports. Everybody has been benefiting from these athletes except for the athletes themselves. The athletes themselves, of course, are offered full ride scholarships, and those are valuable, no question about it. But when you look at all of the money that especially these great big programs generate, the schools are making out like bandits. The fans themselves are paying ticket prices that don't reflect the major salaries that the ticket prices would have to cover at professional sports. This creates more opportunities for students, of course. It's kind of like, why shouldn't they be able to benefit from their name, likeness, and image? I mean, to me, it's ridiculous that they never were allowed to in the past. Scott, I absolutely concede there is risk. I mean, once you start, especially young people with lots of money, anybody that suddenly has lots of money, the array of choices you have before you have now opened up considerably. You can do things now that you weren't able to do before without money. So you get into some of the morality of it. That is a challenge. But it's an individual choice. It's still an individual choice. There still has to be this idea, this element of self-control. I know we like to think of everybody as individuals, and college kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. They should still have their parents' influence in their life, though. So, to me, I think it's a great move. I'm not endorsing the idea of a college athlete going out and prioritizing the $1 million endorsement above their performance on the field and who they are as a human being. All I'm saying is that the choice should be there, and now it is, and, bravo.
Yep, like I said, that's an easy argument to get behind, right?
Yep.
Who's not for individual freedoms? The devil in the details there is what I'm talking about, is that the implementation of this. One possible solution for that I've heard is, yes, you can, quote unquote, earn this money now, but it's deferred until your amateur status, sort of in a trust until your amateur status is finished, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you've completed your eligibility. And maybe that's part of the solution for that, to help keep the pressure off of this. This section of our argument here on this or that talks about the impact on student athletes, plural, and the immediate position is to think about the individual athlete. But, there's also sort of this team component to it as well. What about the intra-team tension that this already going to put on teams when, the view is that people are playing for themselves, right? Playing for the individual and not the team, worried more about their endorsements and making sure that their stat line leads to that, or their social media profile leads to that. The high school student got the $1 million, has 5 million social media followers. Well, basketball is still partly a team game. What do his teammates feel about that? And when he is taking every shot in the game because he's trying to live up to his $1 million earning power, or improve that $1 million earning power, what is the impact on the rest of the team, and what kind of tensions are going to be in place arising from this condition now?
Sure, that will be there. I have no doubt. You'll have these unintended consequences of intra-team jealousies and so forth, different players being motivated by different things. And that is the nature of a team, though. Isn't a team something, a collection of people who all have, different backgrounds or coming
That's all I
from...
say, right? Everyone's jealous of the quarterback or the star player who takes all the shots.
And the art of coaching comes in.
That.
No doubt. Absolutely. And that's where the art of coaching comes in. Great coaches can take all these different personalities and different motivations. They can get Dennis Rodman and Scottie Pippen to play well together, even though they used to fight each other when they were in different teams. That is the art of great coaching. And we also have to remind ourselves, hey, it's great. We like to think of our favorite teams as this collection of guys that all, get together and show up at each other's weddings and hang out in the off season. And that's not true. It's like, for them, it's their job. It's going to work. And even at the college level or at the high school level, everybody on the team, they're in the team and hopefully they're focused in that moment to do a job together the right way. And then they don't necessarily like each other or they don't care much for each other, outside of that. And yes, there is going to be these kind of internal dramas, competitive situations, and so on. A good coach, a good coaching staff will take care of that. And another thing good coaches do and good recruiters do, see through that stuff when they're recruiting. Get rid of the guys or don't recruit the people who they consider would be risks because, they know they're going to come in and earn that $1 million promoting something and put that way above the team. So yeah, conceded point that it's going to introduce challenges, but I think it's overcomable by good coaching and good recruiting.
Overcomable?
Yeah, new word. Yeah, we nice. Invent new words on this or that. It's one of the services we have.
It's overcomable.
Yeah. Unintended benefit.
There you go.
Yeah.
Unintended benefit of nil is the ability to add words to the Webster's
That's right.
Dictionary.
Yeah, we get to do that. Yeah.
Nice. All right, so our next topic, beyond the impact on the student athletes, is the impact on the colleges and the athletic programs themselves. So again, it's kind of leading with the bad policy aspects of this and its impact on the universities. It's having behavioral changes. It's changing the dynamic quite a bit. So just to give a couple of data points here, I read that the University of Illinois, lowly Illinois football, has now a full-time role on staff helping student athletes manage their nil portfolios, right? There's a full-time staffer on the payroll as part of the, I'll loosely call it the coaching staff, but in the football department, fully charged with making sure that everyone stays within the boundaries of what is permissible via nil and helping facilitate this for the students. And if that's going on at Illinois, imagine what is going on at the other universities. Then I saw late last season, Notre Dame took out billboards in the hometowns of each of their players, highlighting the individual, right, the player, and the fact that they were a Notre Dame football player to help, not grease the skids, but to help transition into this world of nil and to show prospective recruits that, hey, these are the types of things we will do to promote you, the individual, and your individual brand. Right? And so that has an impact, a change of behavior, that it's now promoting the individual in all of these markets around the country for Notre Dame football, and this staffing role to help manage this revenue tranche at Illinois. Then, again, the topic being impact on individual colleges and their athletic programs, a couple more aspects to this to argue, or at least data to throw out. There is a chain of fitness centers in South Florida that has decided every scholarship football player, which is 90, 85, I forget the number of scholarships that colleges have, every one of them is now earning $500 a month as part of their nil earning power with the University of Miami from this fitness center chain, right? So everybody gets $500. That's a car, right? That's essentially a new car lease for every football player on the Miami football team because of the quote-unquote generosity of this particular fitness chain. So, is anybody out there listening to the Backup Center's promotion and tweets about this fitness chain? Or is this just a booster wanting Miami to be better? So to say to a prospect, to a recruit, hey, come here and you got $500 a month guaranteed at a minimum from one of our boosters, right? So that's what's going on. Then, and of course that's a negative, right? And we'll get into this more, but if the recruiting playing field isn't even for each of the schools, and you can argue it never was, and we can get into that. Again, this nil policy exacerbates all of these problems. So the argument that says, hey, that was already a problem. Well, it was, and we can work on solving that, But this makes it greater. This exacerbates whatever those existing problems were, right? And so one of those is there's a finite pool of money available, right? At some level, it's a finite pool. So this fitness chain in Florida, right? Instead of $45,000 a month going to the football players themselves, that could be $45,000 a month to the General Athletic Scholarship Fund, right? Or to the athletic department, and so that money got moved out of the university's disposal to the individual player's disposal. And you can say, well, that's good and it's long overdue, and I agree with that point. But now there's a shortfall of $45,000 a month that used to be there for the athletic program, right? And take all that $1 million for the Alabama quarterback. That was $1 million that went into something else. If you know about the academics at Alabama, anybody who has an ACT score of, I think it's 32 or above, gets an automatic tuition-free scholarship to Alabama because they want to increase their academic profile. The way they're able to offer that to increase their academic profile is because their athletic department makes so much GD money. And so if that money is not flowing into the university and flowing into the quarterback's wallet, then there's $1 million less that would have been available to fund these other academic scholarships, right? And so there are impacts on the colleges at the athletic programs at all sorts of different levels because of this name, image, and likeness program legality that's been set up. Not arguing that it's not a good idea, arguing that the devil in the details has all of these unintended consequences that are going to have negative effects on the majority of the individual colleges and athletic programs, right? It's not going to have an impact there on Miami or Alabama in this instance. The recruits are going to want to go to Miami and Alabama for this nil windfall in their individual pockets. But the masses of colleges, it's going to have a negative effect.
Well stated, Scott. You covered a lot of ground there. I think the argument that I would take, we talk about the negative consequences it could have on these large schools and so forth. You mentioned evening the playing field for recruiting, and that's where I'm going to go a little bit here on this one, as far as an impact on individual colleges or college athletic programs. You mentioned, I don't know if it was, I think it was maybe right before we started recording, or maybe it was on air, so to speak, DePaul University, a school we're both familiar with. They were at one time, the number one basketball school in the country, and going back a few decades. And small school, though. Small school. These days, they're not really a brand name in college sports. Now, going forward, they now have this new advantage. In addition to saying, hey, we can offer scholarship money, they can also offer the fact that, Chicago is the second or third largest sports market in the country. And if you come here and you do a good job, hey, you know what? We can start to get you promotional deals with local businesses, or maybe even on a national platform. Suddenly, some of the more name brand schools are being threatened by some of these smaller mid-market schools that now have a new way to start to recruit people. And even for some of the smaller state schools, you might argue, well, hey, this is going to give an advantage for the large population centers. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, whatever, Houston. And sure, yeah, I mean, done right, creative marketing people are going to create that platform for their players. But also in some of these smaller states, University of Iowa, a school we're also both familiar with, small state, Iowa, but it's a national brand when it comes to their football program. And if I was working at the University of Iowa recruiting people, I would be saying, all right, look, we can give you a full ride scholarship. Alabama can also give you a full ride scholarship. So can Illinois, whatever. We've got a really good platform. We believe we can create a national brand out of you. And so in that way, you're taking some of these smaller population center schools or smaller brand name schools, so to speak, and giving that college a little bit better ground, a little bit more even ground to compete upon.
So, I mean, to your point, Paul, it's definitely, so I mentioned it's the Wild West time,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So each school is putting these programs in, and I think what you're saying is there's a new opportunity here, and if you execute it well, you will move up the ladder in some, whether it's DePaul from the very bottom of their basketball profile today to, hey, we've got a chance here to use this to our advantage and move up to prominence we used to have. For a bigger, more established school, they're sort of betting on their ability to out-execute the average school and raise their opportunities to recruit that way.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the heavyweights become even bigger heavyweights now. Maybe Alabama, who certainly has a national platform, in addition to being an absolutely dominant program these days, maybe the heavyweight fight between them and Clemson and Ohio State just got even more interesting. And at the same time, maybe schools like Illinois, you mentioned University of Illinois, really interesting case. I mean, that school, unfortunately for them, has been kind of below the radar screen for quite a long time. But my goodness, I mean, Illinois is still a big state. Chicago is still a premier city. And if Illinois can figure out how to kind of capture some of that and tell some of these five-star recruits, hey, we're not just talking about hanging around in Champaign, Illinois for the next 4 years. We're going to make you the king of Chicago, and then expand that out to more of a national profile. So now you've got Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and so forth, all of a sudden thinking about some of these smaller schools or less high-profile schools starting to come up and kind of nip at their ankles a little bit and potentially stealing some recruits and over time kind of evening out the talent base in the NCAA.
And we'll get into that. So our next topic, and maybe now is a good time to take a break.
Sure.
Because our next topic after the break is the impact on the NCAA and the future of college sports. So you're starting to touch on that now. That's why we put those two topics back to each other. But let's take our first break of the show. And we'll come back and talk about the broader picture of the NCAA and the future of college sports. But we do want to hear your thoughts on this NIL debate and its impact on collegiate athletics. Get in touch with us, please, via email at thisorthat@podcastentertainment.com or through our listener hotline where your clips may be used on the show. The listener hotline is 833-PODSNET, 833-763-7638. And Paul and I will be back after this word from our supporters.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
What if wearing underwear could feel better than going commando? Like if the waistband didn't roll or dig, and the fabric made you sweat less, and the whole thing moved with you, never against you. At Mack Weldon, we're reinventing men's basics, starting with your underwear. Introducing AirKnit X, our lightest, most breathable technology, engineered with 4-way stretch. If you don't love your first pair, it's free. So try one today at MackWeldon.com.
Follow This or That on Twitter @PodEntertain.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
And now, back to This or That on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
Welcome back to This or That, where we are debating the good and the bad of the name, image, and likeness, or NIL debate as it relates to student athletes. And we've covered a lot on the impact on the athletes themselves and their team dynamics. And we've talked about impact on individual colleges and their athletic programs. But now we want to broaden the scope a little bit and talk about the impact on the NCAA and the future of college sports. So my position here in our paradigm for This or That is that I think that the current way that NIL is being implemented is bad policy. Paul is talking about the good side of things and trying to persuade the listener over to that side. I mentioned that I think he starts at a huge advantage here today, but I will win you over through the course of the show here. Again, not arguing that college athletes shouldn't have the ability to earn. My real strong argument is that the current implementation, this sort of wild, wild west period, because the legislatures, either at a national level or state levels, and more importantly, the NCAA, which leads us into this topic, wasn't able to get their act together in time to put a solid framework in place for the student athlete, is leading to all sorts of unintended consequences and negative overall effects. So this topic here, the impact on the NCAA and the future of college sports, I think is already showing itself. So as we approach the July 1st date when several states' laws were set to go into effect, the NCAA, they tried a couple times to get a framework in place, then said, look, we've got like 3 days left, pass this law real fast, pass this rule real fast, and we'll have a framework in place. Or it's everybody roll your own. Everybody's on their own with this. And that's how it ended up. It's just sort of this hodgepodge of loose parameters that lead to different rules being in place than a solid framework would have provided. And essentially, the NCAA has abdicated their position, abdicated their leadership role. In fact, it's come out since then that the NCAA itself is arguing for more conference autonomy, right? So the NCAA, as this one national body, right, who trips over their feet constantly, right, not arguing against that, but rather than have a national structure in place, I would argue just be better, NCAA, rather than just abdicate your position. And here is one example where the NCAA bureaucracy and structure and leadership have done such a poor job that we've reached the point of this free-for-all as it relates to NIL and the disintegration of a national leadership framework or body for college sports. So the NCAA is essentially gone as we know it. Then the future of college sports. Again, since this NIL framework went into place, these NIL laws, we're starting a new batch of realignment. What is going to happen here? Because everybody wants to say to the prospect, to the recruit, your earning power is greater here. And so everybody's trying to maximize their earning power, their own individual ability, as we talked before about the impact on individual colleges and their athletic programs. The impact on the future of college sports is now rapidly shifting. Again, we had realignment years ago, and we're going to have another round of that now. All with the intent of maximizing NIL earning power for the recruit that makes the conference stronger, which makes the conference's TV deal stronger, right? And again, this sort of arms race as it relates to that. Then the last point I want to make about this being bad policy, and Paul mentioned before that, hey, this may provide an opportunity for one of the have-nots to join and nip at the heels of the haves in college football, college basketball, because they've executed on NIL better than the average school, and so it's given them an opportunity. I will argue that it's going to do the opposite thing. It is going to make the haves much stronger, right? You know, Miami with $500 a month from one health club chain. The Alabama quarterback gets $1 million. What five-star quarterback is going to want to go to the Iowas of the world or to Kansas State? What's the NIL earning power in Manhattan, Kansas? What's the NIL earning power, you know, at some of these other schools? And so the haves are going to thrive through NIL. The have-nots are not going to thrive. And so that is going to be the impact, an unintended consequence, a bad policy resulting from this name, image, likeness condition we have now in college sports.
Great thoughts, Scott. Great thoughts. So I'm going to make this statement. I'm going to say that NIL is the one thing that could potentially save college sports. We are in an age where we're seeing the ability to organize amateur sports stronger than it's ever been in the past. Anybody who has kids playing sports these days understands that club sports is where it is at. Everybody gets into whether it's hockey, baseball, basketball, football, whatever. The real deal these days is club sports, and this club sports business is big. Tournaments, showcases. You can travel all across the country. It's easier than ever. It's basically because of how easy it is to communicate these days on the internet. You can find the best 10 amateur baseball teams in whatever age group you want and decide, hey, let's have a tournament and do that. What on earth is stopping this happening at the college level? Nothing. You can go and start a business essentially and recruit people that are 18, 19, 20 years old and start to host your own showcases and things like that and kind of present this as an alternative to college sports. It's already happening. The NBA or basketball has already demonstrated that, not even just in the case of absolute superstars, it's possible to go from high school straight to the NBA. We've got this perfunctory freshman year you have to go in there and play for these guys that would otherwise be going straight to the NBA. So that's kind of this false barricade that's been set up, kind of collusion between the NBA and the NCAA to make sure that NCAA basketball still survives. So I think that these NIL laws coming along will actually serve to enhance the quality of college sports, at least for a little bit longer. Now, I want to react to one other point. The haves and the have-nots. So Scott did a nice job kind of drawing a scenario where it's not going to be a case where smaller schools or lower tier schools are able to kind of recruit a little bit better and close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. He's arguing, no, what'll actually happen is what's already happening in Miami, where businesses are offering $500 a month. Essentially, that the haves are going to pull away. So I think if I was to kind of carry out that scenario to its logical conclusion, we'll get to a point where there's maybe 20 schools in the country that we can properly call Division I kind of professional football preparatory schools or professional basketball type preparatory schools. And I would say, okay, yeah, maybe that would happen. What I'd like the listeners to think about, though, is that actually a bad thing? What's so horrible about that? We're already kind of going that way with these super conferences occurring, and it's all about the money. It's all about recruiting the very best athletes. And a lot of the promise is you come here, you'll play in the NFL. You'll come here, you play in the NBA. So, maybe we just kind of stop all this nonsense and kind of concede, hey, that's where this is all going anyway. Let it naturally occur. Let's get to the point where there's really just one super conference in the nation for basketball and football. You divide it into two conferences, just like in the major sports. And you have a true college football championship that doesn't depend on any kind of arbitrary rating system or ranking system. There's still college sports and other conferences. They fall into something called Tier 2 or Division 2 or whatever. But hey, if all the money is going to these big schools and that's what's going to happen, maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah. So I like how we've structured the show because you're leading into the impact on fans.
Yep.
And that's our next topic. So
sure.
You're kind of talking about the schools themselves, but really you're saying there is that there are going to be these super teams, and you're saying that's not a bad thing, and I'm saying it is. But really what we're measuring that by is its impact on fans. So let's get into that topic. And I'll talk about that. To me, the way to frame the impact on fans is to think of the Green Bay Packers. Not a college, right? Pro football team. If there wasn't revenue sharing in the NFL, if the TV money wasn't split equally among all the teams, there would be no Green Bay Packers. They wouldn't exist. They don't have the market in a small town to compete with the other teams financially. Mm-hmm. If all that TV money wasn't being shared equally, if all of that other revenue isn't being shared equally, if there wasn't a salary cap in place that allowed them to contend for free agents, the Green Bay Packers would be gone, completely vaporized. And that is essentially what's going to happen to college athletics. If there wasn't that structure in place in pro baseball, the Yankees and the Dodgers would have all the free agents. If it weren't that way in football with sharing with the Packers, the Cowboys would have everybody, right? Jerry would spend, every dime, and their popularity would lead everything to, migrate over time. The ability of the Cowboys to get the best players would dwarf that of the Packers and lead to that end result. And that is going to be what happens to fandom. So you've seen some of these programs, college programs, now segueing into talking about college, where prolonged failure leads to a deterioration of the fan base. And I don't think that's debatable. You like every once in a while that your team rises up and everybody gets excited. And I think of Mississippi State a few years ago where they were one of the top couple teams in the country, and all of a sudden there were Mississippi State fans that wouldn't shut up everywhere around the world, kind of thing. Right? And so, but they needed that. If they didn't have that hope of it happening every 20 years, 30 years, it wouldn't exist. They'd dry on the vine and would never, trying to extend the analogy, never get the nurturing that they need to blossom for that period of time. So if we end up at a point in time where 20 fan bases are all that matter, how is that good for the fans? All of these other schools that are not even second rate, but right now they're 1A. They're the Michigans of the world who haven't had success lately. Teams like Baylor. What are the nil earning opportunities for a college athlete in Waco, Texas? They're toast also. They're going to be done as it relates to that. Unless there's one or two big benefactors out there that are going to self-support the athletes, like Oregon and Phil Knight, or, the money that used to flow into Oklahoma State. If that's not there, and there are these teams that all of the earning power flows to these top elite programs, the impact on fans, if there's no hope, goes away completely over time. As a longtime Illinois football fan, I feel that. It's really hard to get excited about Illinois football to the point where, it's hit or miss whether I watch a game. It's tough to be in that position. And if you knew it wasn't ever going to happen for you, because you can't compete in this world where already these disadvantages exist for recruiting, but now throw in 7-figure earning power for the big schools for the kids at the big schools. You don't stand a hope at all. And you're not going to commit to that long term. And so the impact on fans is going to be great for the 20 schools that it exists for. And I don't even think it's 20 personally. It's probably 6 or 7. And of the, call it 120 Division I football teams, the other 114, 113 programs, there's no sense being a fan anymore. The impact on fans is wholly negative through this framework as it exists today of nil. Paul, what do you say about that?
Again, you covered a lot of ground there. You made some great points. So I play in a recreational hockey league. It's a very low level of competition. And I like to joke that rec league players don't know how bad they are and they're still having fun. And I would make that same kind of analogy for football fans. So we're concerned about the experience of the fan and if the fan can still enjoy their team. So if you think about like directional schools, Northern Illinois, Southern Illinois, Northeast, Louisiana State, whatever. If you're a student at one of these schools and there's a football game on Saturday and they've got a stadium that holds 30,000 people and they're playing against the neighboring directional school from another state and that stadium fills up and there's tailgating and there's a great game out on the field and the athletes just don't happen to be 5-star recruits, but you're there having a good time rooting for your team, hey, you're still having fun. It's still a great fan experience. And then at the end of the year, your team goes 7-4 playing against, quote, subpar competition, and they get invited to some kind of a bowl game. Hey, bonus. You still get to watch your team again in the last week of December or maybe even on January 1st if you're lucky. So just because your team isn't Alabama or Clemson doesn't mean that the student body or people that are local to that area aren't still able to get excited about it. Another point is that we're kind of both operating under this assumption that this could inevitably kind of come down to just 20 schools or maybe even just 6 schools. I don't know. That is one thing that can happen. We tend to think in terms of unforeseen consequences, unforeseen negative things. There could be unforeseen positive scenes. You mentioned, Phil Knight, Nike. He already has done quite a bit of funding, for Oregon football and basketball. And, why can't more things like that happen? We don't know for sure. There is this kind of like, bringing back the fan a little bit. Or we're talking about fans right now. There's this opportunity for the fans to actually have more of an impact than ever. It's almost like the democratization of amateur sports or college sports where we could have a business that says, you know what, I want my alma mater to move up to this top tier. I'm going to put all this money into the school. I'm going to invite these athletes to come in and promote my products or my service, my company. It's unintended good things could happen too, or unintended positive things for the fans. It's easy to, I think, for both of us to sit here and say, hey, we're going to follow the money, and it's going to wind up with these 6, 8, 10 schools. Not necessarily, though. And even if it does, again, I'll go back to my argument that, hey, even the people at directional schools, they don't know how bad they are. They're still having fun. It's still great competition. And if you go back several decades, Scott, I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember when, the Big Ten every year played the Pac-10 in the Rose Bowl. And that was great. And to some degree, we didn't know any better. And the emphasis on having a single national champion has become so big that that's not good enough anymore. Winning the Rose Bowl doesn't matter anymore. You wind up number 6 in the country and winning the Rose Bowl, not good enough anymore. At one time, that was great. And as a person that goes to one of these schools, when your team is in the Rose Bowl, you still kind of, for that moment, you're in a bubble. You don't care what the rest of the world thinks. When the Chicago Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup a few years ago, those of us who love hockey, we were super excited. 1 out of 10 people in Chicago cared, But it's still, you're in that bubble, in that moment, it's still exciting. So you go to that directional school, your team wins the conference, you're still excited. You're still having a great fan experience. You don't really care that Oregon is playing against Georgia for the national championship game.
So I'll make one counterpoint to that, and then we'll take our break and get into our last 2 topics. But you described this directional school as going 7-4, and the reason they could go 7-4 against their level of competition is because they do have a few decent recruits.
Sure.
And they're not going to. Those guys are going to be gone. They're going to be going somewhere where they have better earning power. It won't be about playing time. They know they're not going pro, those decent, not great recruits. So today they would go because they could be the starting quarterback at a directional school. And instead they're going to say, hey, I've got a limited earning power. I need to maximize whatever I can get. And even though I'm 3rd string at Miami, I'm still getting $500 a month, right? $6,000 a year to go to school there. I'm going there. instead. And so that directional school gets worse and worse and worse is my argument as to what will happen under the current structure.
Yeah, my argument against that is that $500 a month for Miami or some local guy in my small town is going to offer that money to that recruit as well. Or instead of stealing that person from Miami where he's going to go and be the third string quarterback, I'm just now taking that person from a different directional school.
Okay. All right. So that leads us into our second break, and we'll be back. We've got two topics. One is going to be the future of recruiting and how coaches are going to have to adapt. And then the second is going to be the quality of play on the field, which we've started to touch on. Again, there's a real natural transition to each of the topics as we talk about this nil topic here on this episode of This or That. Stick with us after the break. Please do get in touch with the show. We want to hear your feedback in what the actual outcome is of Paul and I arguing the point and counterpoint to each of these topics. 833-PODSNET. That's 833-763-7638. 763-7638. Or email us thisorthat@podcastentertainment.com. We'll be right back.
This or That is brought to you by...
Here's a thought. What if all the most essential pieces of your wardrobe, like your underwear, socks, and t-shirts, actually fit? As in didn't roll over, fall down, or ride up. Crazy, right? At Mack Weldon, we're reinventing men's basics with premium fabrics and smarter, more ergonomic design. We've spent thousands of hours designing, prototyping, and testing every piece, so you can spend thousands of hours doing what you care about way more comfortably. Upgrade today at MackWeldon.com.
Enjoying this podcast? Be sure to check out all the other PEN podcasts by visiting www.podcastentertainment.com.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them?
By their clothes,
their age,
the way they speak.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
Get in touch with the show through email at thisorthat@podcastentertainment.com. This is This or That with your hosts, Paul Grote and Scott Sanders.
All right, welcome back to the show. So we're talking about the name, image, likeness framework that's in place now as of July 1st in the world of student athletes, not just college, although that's where the focus is. And we've covered a few different topics, some of the most important ones so far, where Paul is taking the position that these name, image, likeness opportunities for the student athlete is a good thing, and I am taking the position that it's a bad thing. And we're each trying to persuade you, the listener, over to our side of the argument. Looking forward to your feedback as to whether one or the other of us has succeeded. So please do get in touch with the show through the hotline or through our email. We've talked so far about the impact on student athletes, the impact on colleges and their athletic programs, the impact on the NCAA and the future of college sports, and the impact on the fans. So we've got two sections left in our six-pronged argument here. And the one we want to get into now is the future of recruiting. How will this new landscape impact recruiting and coaches and what they're going to have to do differently, how their behaviors are going to have to change. So I mentioned I've got the side that this is bad policy, the way the framework is implemented so far. And I think that does extend to the impact on recruiting because it totally changes the way recruiting takes place away from things like quality of life, quality of education, opportunities the school provides you, everything related to the school and the lifestyle of being an athlete at that school, to what is my earning power if I sign with you? That is the end-all be-all right now. Now that can have some subpoints to it, like playing time, like TV prominence, like ability to compete for championships, but it all is framed around the context of its impact on my earning power. Do you think now that the number one thing immediately said by the staff at Miami is, hey, we just signed this deal with the health club chain that everyone gets $500 a month. Here's how that's going to work for you. And we're teeing up this guy and this guy and this business and that business. And your earning power, if you come here, is going to be unlimited because of these 12 reasons. And that becomes the entirety of the recruiting pitch. Nothing to do with the quality of life at the school, the education that's learned along the way, the lifelong contacts that you make there. Everything about that is now secondary. And you'll say, well, it was secondary. At the big schools, it was all about getting them to the NFL or the NBA. And that's true. And that's a different problem in and of itself, not what we're arguing here. But if you thought that the university and the academic programs and the campus lifestyle and all of those things were secondary before. That was all just about the wish, the dream about getting to the pros. Now it's about the immediate gratification of earning power through nil and what that's going to do. So they now become entirely different personalities, the coaching staff, the recruiters, because it's about what nil opportunities do we have lined up? What do we do to promote you? Notre Dame taking out those billboards, it was strictly for them to be able to say, look how well we embrace nil. We are going to promote you not just on NBC and through our national brand and our primetime television slots and all of that. We're going to promote you in your hometown. We're going to promote you where the business opportunities are greatest for you. We've talked about nil in Waco, Texas, and nil in Manhattan, Kansas, right? Well, what about that recruit who's from LA and the nil opportunities for him in his hometown that comes through this because that school has the right connections to unlock that nil money for them. So it's going to have a huge negative impact on what the recruiting process becomes. What say you, Paul? What do you think of that?
So it's definitely going to be different. No question about that. Coaches can now go, they've got another tool in the toolbox, so to speak, right? They can now go sit in that recruit's living room and talk to the parents and say, hey, in addition to this 4-year scholarship, you're going to have opportunities to earn money, doing endorsements, and so forth. Again, it's just the question is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? You mentioned the immediate gratification, and one of the challenges is, for these recruits and for programs and so forth, is kind of like a value system. The underlying assumption here is everybody values money above everything else. And look, people do value money or they think they value money. Money is certainly a tremendous motivator, but it's not everything. And in truth, in life, people are going to be motivated by other things. In particular, purpose. What's their purpose in life? What's their purpose on a football team? You've got to feel fulfilled. And I think that, as coaches are able to go in and offer money, recruits they're all, a single recruit is always going to be offered kind of roughly the same level of monetary incentive, okay? Let's just say, 4-star football recruit, all college coaches are going to know that, hey, that player is going to be capable of a certain level of play, and the coaches are going to offer various packages or whatever, but it's all going to be kind of roughly the same. Then the recruiter is going to have to be, sit there and say, okay, well, what matters to me? If I go here, I'm going to get the $500 a month from Miami. If I go to Oregon, I'm going to get something from Phil Knight, and so on and so forth. But if one school is saying, hey, you're going to be a starter by the time you're a sophomore, or one school is saying, hey, our campus experience is second to none, another school says, whatever it is that they have to offer, or maybe it's, hey, how about this as a concept, a great education, come on over to University of Illinois, a really good school. You're going to get the same money here, or the same opportunities, same kind of endorsements that you would get if you went to Ohio State, but boy, our academic programs are amazing. We've got this wonderful,
how's that working so far for them?
Engineering school, whatever. I'm saying that there's more to life than just the money. And the money is almost going to become this kind of, hey, I can get money here, I can get money there. Sure, they'll pay me a little bit more there than they will here, but I will start to think beyond just the money. I'll start to think about experiences and purpose and so forth.
Man, you live in a strange world if you think that that's what's going to happen. So. All right, we've got one topic left. I think before getting into that last topic, I wanted to say this about recruiting, just in terms of, and I don't know if it's a good or a bad, but there's going to be recruiting roles now that aren't recruiting student athletes. They're recruiting the businesses to provide the nil income. Like I mentioned, Illinois has a full-time staffer role to help facilitate that. That may be the key to recruiting going forward, is how many brands do I have lined up, not how many 4-star athletes do I have lined up. Right? Because the 4-star athletes are the result of the brands. And so the impetus and the driver of that becomes, which brands can I line up to be nil sponsors here of my student athletes? So another change to the recruiting dynamic.
True, for sure. And, for me to kind of come out of my, what world are you living in, Paul, to kind of the reality of dollars and cents, I guess I would say, okay, great. So what? You've got, more tools in the toolbox, lining up nil opportunities. So, what was that school in Waco, Texas, where we're concerned, hey, maybe there aren't those types of opportunities. It comes down to creative people on your staff. It comes down to, we can create, not just a local profile, but a national profile. I think, honestly, it'll be fascinating. I think it could be very interesting to see, hey, which schools emerge. We're just changing the rules here. We're changing the rules, and some schools are going to be really good at it. Some schools might fall asleep. Schools that have kind of benefited from the national reputation or the large market Ohio State, good example. Columbus, one of the larger college cities around. They could get caught napping. The directional school or the school in a lower population state that hires a really good staff that knows how to line up those nil opportunities could actually come in and turn the tables a little bit. I think it'll be fascinating to see how this goes.
I fully agree with that. It will be fascinating to see all of the positive and negative impacts. It's definitely a different world now in college athletics than it was just a month ago.
Totally. Yep.
All right, so our final topic here in our debate is the quality of play on the field. And again, I've got the side of the argument that the resulting quality of play on the field will be negative. And I think that is going to be the case in the large majority of instances. So if you think that the talent is going to pool itself towards the successful schools in the nil world, those teams are going to be better. The quality of competition between the halves is going to be greater, much more NFL-like in terms of the quality of player, much more NBA-like if we're talking about basketball. For the rest of them, who have now lost their top recruits because they couldn't compete with that and are playing in this sort of second-tier world, their overall quality of play is going to diminish. Fewer stars. Even some of these have-not schools, in our example we keep using here, the University of Illinois football team, they do have 2 or 3 guys a year who get drafted, 2 or 3 talented players who become the stars on that team. If those guys are gone, their quality of play diminishes. They've got a second stringer essentially playing at each of those spots. Somebody got elevated up through the ranks to take over for those stars. And so their quality of play diminishes. So the haves have all the talent, and they used to beat the have-nots 56-3. Now they're going to beat them 72-3. So that gap widens. Then more have-nots. There's going to be a lot of close games, Harvard-Yale type games, but instead of it being a Harvard-Yale type game, it's going to be an Iowa-Michigan State type game that is playing of the caliber that is lessened because their stars have gone somewhere else. So their quality of play is diminished. Now it's more equal. They're both living in a have-not world. And so you could say, well, the scores are going to be closer. The chance for my team to win against another have-not have increased, but the overall quality of play is diminished. Paul mentioned, his affinity for rec league hockey. I wanted to say at the time, well, how many fans come to those games, right? if it's all about love of the game, how many fans show up for your, 9 p.m. rec league hockey game? And that same environment will result from the lower quality of play on the field for all of these have-nots. And make no mistake about it, the number of have-nots is going to rise rapidly through the current condition of this name, image, likeness framework. Paul, what's the counterpoint to that?
So first thing is that whatever it is, the top 8 schools, top 20 schools, there is still a limit on the number of people that can be on those rosters. Unless the NCAA or the conferences or whatever says, hey, go for it. You can recruit 200 guys a year. So you're still going to have all these players that are looking for homes. They're going to go play somewhere. They're going to wind up at some of these, so-called, second-tier schools, second-tier, third-tier schools. We've already seen in the past decade, 2 decades, an acceleration toward a more concentrated number of high-talent schools. To some degree, you have to ask, how much more talented can a team like Alabama get? I mean, that school already has 20 guys a year are being drafted into the NFL, or, it's probably not quite that much, but how many more? There's not enough room.
Well, let me interject here because I'm chomping at the bit. Let's think about it in terms of basketball because it's easier with a limited roster.
Sure, 15-man roster.
Yeah. So you've got 15 scholarships and you've got, 5 walk-ons?
Sure.
At the end of the bench typically.
Yeah.
That guy who's earning $1 million already from his name, image, and likeness, he'll tell you, take your scholarship and shove it because I'll be the 13th guy that walk on, or the 16th guy that walk on, and now we've got 16 scholarship caliber players to that other team's 15. And you do that 5 times, I've got a roster 20 deep of guys earning enough to say, keep your scholarship. And so Alabama will have more football players. If a dozen of them say, keep your scholarship because I'm earning a 7-figure payday, keep your $40,000 worth of restrictions on me, right? Then those walk-on roles become essentially scholarship level talent. And again, in football, it doesn't matter if there's 81 versus 80 or 86 versus 85. It does matter in basketball,
sure,
where the 16th guy matters.
Well, and you still only have 5 spots on the floor.
Yeah. That's true.
So that's where if I'm the school down the road, I'm saying, yeah, sure, you can go over to Duke and be their 16th guy, or you can come play for me and you'll be my number one guy, and maybe instead of $1 million, we can get 800,000, or maybe I can get you $1 million. Again, maybe I'm DePaul University, this kind of sleeping school, but in a giant market. There is only one way to recruit talent right now. It's the scholarship. That is it. And then you can get into, the quality of the campus and all that kind of stuff. But as Scott mentioned to me a little while ago, what world am I living in? It's about the money. It's about the money. So if it's about the money, then we've got one tool right now. It's the scholarship. So now it comes down to the talent, not just of the players, but the talent of the people that are running these sports departments, the athletic director, the staff that person hires. How are they going to go out and be savvy and recruit these people? And they've now got more tools to recruit players. It's not just about the scholarship anymore. They can get really creative. And I'm saying it's a little bit of a faith in kind of a free market system. Anybody that wants it, they can go park themselves at Oklahoma State or Arkansas State or whatever and say, hey, you know what? I've got 5 super talented, business-minded, sports-minded people who are going to help me build a great program here. It's possible, it's doable, and I do believe that quality of play on the field will be sustainable, not just at those top 8 programs, but throughout. And it's because you're going to have people that are motivated to build good programs. You look at in the real paid leagues today, the New York Yankees have won more World Series than anybody. The second most, St. Louis Cardinals. In St. Louis, kind of a mid-population city, not a big market. So it can happen. You put together the right sort of people, absolutely. Quality of play on the field should not suffer.
Okay, well stated there, Paul. I definitely see the merits of the argument that you're making there. I think sort of wrapping this up and why we picked this topic now because of its timeliness, I think we can both sort of agree that there are going to be, both good and bad, a whole lot of unforeseen outcome from the current framework of the name, image, and likeness. And we really have to sort of put a pin in this for now and see how it evolves, see what some of the results are. We've hypothesized as to what may happen, I think negatively and you positively, but none of us know right now. As I think about that and sort of make the point about it, I know that there are 3 offensive lines. I know Wisconsin was one, Notre Dame was one, and there was one other, which I think is Oregon, but I forget, that the local barbecue shop, because these are the big beefy boys of the team, to be endorsers for theirs, because who better to endorse barbecue than the left tackle of the football team, kind of thing. So maybe it will end up being a positive and everybody gets a little bit of a slice of the pie or slice of the barbecue sandwich, to stick with the metaphor. But most of all, we're just going to have to wait and see how this evolves. I think it's unstructured implementation is going to lead to a lot of negative outcomes. And Paul's faith in humanity, it seems, believes that the good is going to definitely outweigh the bad with this.
Yeah, it's more of a faith in the markets than it is faith in humanity. I will concede that there's going to be a Wild West. We're going to see some bad ideas and some bad outcomes for a few years, but over time, as any market matures, the good ideals will win out. The best possible outcome will be the one that the market wants. And the market is made up of people making decisions, and the smart people making the good business decisions are the ones who will win out in this. And as a fan, I'm not worried. I'm not concerned that this whole thing's going to go away. My sports appetite will still be satisfied, one way or another. I know I'm going to be watching great sports at the collegiate level, no matter what happens.
While we're waiting to see how these consequences play out, to wrap things up, maybe we can get the network here to sponsor like the 3rd string left guard from Arkansas State. So we'll see. Maybe
if you're listening, give us a call.
Yeah. Maybe we could buck up and afford the left tackle, something like that. So we'll see how it all plays out. So thanks for spending your time with us here on This or That on the Podcast Entertainment Network. Again, we do encourage you to get in touch with the show. Let us know your feelings about whether one or the other of us have been able to persuade you to our point of view. Get in touch with the show through the listener hotline, 833-PODSNET. That's 833-763-7638. Or via email, thisorthat@podcastentertainment.com. Until next time, this is Scott Sanders and Paul Grote for This or That on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
Want to stay informed of new episodes on your favourite shows? Sign up for the PEN Listener Club at www.podcastentertainment.com. Thank you for listening to today's episode of This or That.